Yes, please do.
Is my screen visible?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you for joining, everybody. My name is Chitransh, and with my teammate Nanon, we solved a solution for Corpovenista on the distribution of social housing via a platform known as Blackbeard. And a little introduction about ourselves. My name is Chitransh, and I'm a recent graduate from TU Delft. I studied systems engineering, and I'm originally from India. And Nanon, she's from Germany, and she's a recent graduate in psychology from University of Groningen. Uh, so yeah, I think I'll just start with the presentation then. So I think I'm not sure if everyone is aware. I mean, we as two student consultants solved help Corpovenista in making their current system of distribution of social housing more efficient and more fair. And that's why we have sort of named this challenge a paradigm shift in the distribution of social housing. So I'll just start with the presentation now. Something's wrong.
No, it worked.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just go through the problem in very brief way. So we have identified three problems, and I think you guys are already aware of it. There's an excessive demand for the social housing, and the status quo is basically the supply for the social housing is far less as compared to the demand, which also leads to more waiting time for people, and also a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the people who are looking for housing in the Netherlands. And the way the current distribution system works, it has become very complicated for people to understand, and also in the distribution of housing, which overall reduces the efficiency of the existing system. And also, we identified there are a lot of people who just sign up on these for the social housing, given the fact there's so much of waiting time, and even they're not really in the need for the social housing. They just put their name on the waiting list, which also causes a lot of problem when it comes to distribution of social housing. So the system that we have defined is based on four key metrics, which is basically efficiency, effectiveness, ethics, and fairness. And how we define these metrics are we define fairness on the based on the philosophy of John Rawls, which Nanon will talk to you about in brief in the upcoming slides. And we have defined efficiency based on if it reduces the overall time of the distribution of social housing, and if the system is easier to understand both for the corporate minister and also for the users who are looking for the social housing. And by effectiveness, we define if the overall satisfaction of the users or the people who are looking for the social housing, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who needs to be satisfied with the entire system, and they are the primary consumers of this, let's say, the system. And how we have defined ethics, we have defined it by the concept of universalizability, which means laws and rules will not harm anybody and will not benefit somebody just due to special external or individual interest, to ensure that the equity is maintained in the system, and people and whatever the choices or whatever the distribution of housing exist with this new system, it is fair, and it ensures equity in the system. So, for the proposal, the central housing policy of the Netherlands focuses on the adequacy of the social housing, which is basically if the social housing is sufficient for the people who are applying, and also focuses on the affordability of the social housing. However, the affordability aspect of the central policy of the Netherlands was out of the scope of this challenge. So we have focused more on the adequacy and sufficiency of the social housing. And how we have done that, we came up with a metric known as room stress, which is also popular in US and China. how they distribute the dwellings in their own countries. And it's basically to match the right size of the dwelling to the right amount of people who can actually sustain in that living. I'll explain a bit more how it works basically. So room stress is actually a fairly very straightforward calculation. So what, as you can see in the table below, first what you need to do is you need to evaluate the number of rooms which are available in the dwellings. So for example, let's say there are three, and then comes the tricky part, which basically you have to identify the required number of rooms for the family who applied for the social housing. And for example, let's say that's four. So how do you calculate room stress? It's fairly easy. You divide the number of rooms in the dwelling by the required number of rooms for the family minus one. So basically, you get a number from basically any integer. And so the idea is, if the room stress value, let's say it's zero, then you can say the dwelling is a perfect fit for the family who applied for the social housing. And if the room stress value goes more on the positive side, then it's a bit of an overfit. And if the room stress value goes on the negative side, then it's an underfit for the family who applied for the social housing. And the interesting part here is, how do we define the required number of rooms for the family? So how we have done that is, basically, if there is a single adult, we say, I mean, a single adult requires one room, and if there is a couple, they can stay together in one room, and if there are two couples, so basically two rooms are allotted. So it becomes more complicated when there are children involved. So how we have tried to mitigate that, for example, if there are let's say if there's a couple with two children and both of the children are below the age of 10 and are of the same sex, then we say perhaps they can share a room because they are still small children and they are both boys or girls, or it's easier for them to share the rooms. And for instance, if they are of the different sex, then we allocate individual rooms for the children. And also, if the children are above age of 10, then we have identified that the children are supposed to get their own rooms, because as they grow up in teens, children need their more privacy, and they also have schools and stuff. So I think it's just fair to for them to have their own rooms. And now Nanan will take you through our proposal. So floor is yours, Nanan.
Thank you, Chitransh. So I'm proposing our actual system now that integrates the factors that Chitransh just explained and some more factors that I'm going to talk about. Taking into account what he just said, we suggest to make use of a point system, because that way we can distribute social housing in a fair and efficient manner. First of all, we suggest to establish 3 separate waiting lists: one for apartments with a lift, one for single family homes, and one for apartments without a lift. Every single waiting list will have 2 urgency groups, with each urgency group that includes specific candidates, and I will tell you more about this later. So how would the point allocation actually look like? A person that does not belong to an urgency group will receive 10 points per year of waiting time. However, a candidate that belongs to an urgency group would get more points per year. For example, a candidate that belongs to urgency group 1 could receive 50 extra points per year, and a candidate that belongs to urgency group 2 would receive 30 extra points per year. In addition to this, 20 extra points would be allocated to the candidate that has the best room stress value. In order to justify our approach with prioritizing candidates, I quickly want to refer to John Rawls on distributive justice. John Rawls was a very influential American moral and political philosopher that lived from 1921 until 2002. And he stated that in order to create fairness, states and organizations must compensate for differences between individuals in a way that equal opportunities for everybody can be guaranteed. So following this, housing corporations should also compensate for disadvantaged individuals. And this can be done if housing corporations make use of specific prioritizing processes, which is exactly what our point system with its urgency groups will take into consideration. Now I'll start explaining the urgency groups for apartments with a lift. Urgency group 1 for apartments with a lift could include candidates with a medical disability that will impact them longer than half a year and impairs them from walking upstairs. And urgency group 2 could include candidates that receive an old age pension. Unfortunately, we could not find a severity categorization of disability in the Dutch system. Therefore, we have a suggestion how this could actually look like following a German system. Germany, for example, established a categorization of severity of disability. It ranges from 0 to 100. And following the categorization, people with a degree of disability from 50 onwards are seen as severely disabled. Perhaps a similar system in the Netherlands could facilitate the differentiation of what person falls into urgency group 1 and what person does not. Using this system as an example, it could, for example, be said that people with a degree of disability from 50 onwards could fall into urgency group 1. So what kind of information would actually be needed in order to allocate people to these urgency groups now? Regarding apartments with a lift, people with medical disabilities could upload a letter of diagnosis, while people that receive an old age pension could upload a statement of their bank account or a letter of authority. And yeah, now we will have a look how the urgency groups for single family homes could look like. The urgency group 1 for single family homes could include families within the governmental crisis accommodation, also known as the Crisisopvang in Dutch. And it could also entail families where 1 or 2 parents suffer from medical disabilities. For example, disabilities like multiple sclerosis or intellectual disabilities like the Down syndrome. Additionally, it has to impact them longer than a year in order to belong to urgency group 1. Urgency group 2 could entail families with children that have medical disabilities that will impact them longer than a whole year. And what kind of information would have to be collected for single family homes now? Like what would be the criteria check? Corpovenista could ask their clients to upload a letter of authority for families in the Crisisopvang, and for medical disabilities, a letter of diagnosis again could be requested. So now I'm going to talk about apartments without a lift and their urgency groups. Urgency group 1 could include victims of domestic violence, homeless adults, and young mothers that are part of the maatschappelijke opvang. People that suffer from severe psychological disorders should also be included. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Medical Disorders, also known as the DSM-5, could help clarifying when a disorder is severe. And it's also the common used psychological diagnosis tool in the Netherlands. So urgency group 2 could include people that suffer from minor to moderate psychological disorders then. It should also include ex-convicts. And what kind of criteria would be needed to check here by Corpovenista? We thought that a letter of diagnosis that states that people are part of the maatschappelijke opvang could be requested, and people diagnosed with a psychological disorder also have to provide a letter of diagnosis. Additionally, a letter of authority should be requested from ex-convicts as well. So now I'm going to run you through an example on how this distribution of social housing would actually look like using our point system. Imagine that there are 23 apartments with a lift. We would then first look at who got most points out of all the people that fall into urgency group 1. And then we would make use of a quota in a way that we give away 20% of the apartments 2 people of the 3 apartments, 2 people in urgency group 1. In our example, that would result in 4 selected candidates. Lastly, we would distribute the other 80% to people that are having the most points in general. Hereby, that's very important, we would not prioritize between urgency group 2 and people that are not in an urgency group. Yep, that was it. Now Chitransh is going to take over again.
Thank you, Nanon. Just to summarize what Nanon has explained our system. So we begin with a quota urgency group in which we basically allocate the 20% of the dwellings to the people who scored the most points in the urgency group 1, because they are the ones who are in the most need for the social housing, and we need to take into account for that. And after the quota urgency group is followed by the point allocation system, which Nanon has already explained how the point allocation works, how much points are given for each urgency group, and how and after point allocation based on their personal circumstances, as Nanon already mentioned on the criteria of the urgency groups, then we calculate the room stress for each family or the people who actually applied for the social housing. In that way, we ensure that the right dwelling is getting matched with the people, so which ensures the efficiency of the system and also the adequacy. So as I already explained, the calculation of room stress, which is fairly straightforward. And finally, the rest 80% of the dwellings is allocated uh, fairly on the points, and no special consideration is given in this segment. So to implement our solution into the existing system, there needs to be some additional data collected by the Corpovenista. So as Nanon already explained in our slides, there are certain criteria check that can be uploaded by the people who are applying for the social housing, uh, just to ensure that they actually fall in the urgency groups, which can also be verified by the Corpovenista. So the documents for the urgency groups by the people who are actually applying for a particular segment in the urgency groups, and which is followed by the room stress. And as I already mentioned, the room stress is a fairly straightforward calculation. And the data that needs to be collected is the number of people who are actually applying for the housing, how many of them are actually adults, how many of them are actually children, and if the children are below age of 10, and also the gender of the children. And it just follows the same, the allocation process based on the point system, as we have already explained. Uh, Although, I mean, no system is a perfect system, and our system that we have proposed, it has its pros and cons. So I'll just quickly go through what are the pros and the cons of our proposed system. The main pros of our system is it increases adequacy and efficiency by just and proper allocation of the dwelling to the people who are looking for the social housing. Moreover, it also provides a better overview for the Corpovenista on the different housing segments, for example, apartments with lift, apartments without lift, and what the supply and demand looks like for the individual housing segment, so that they can also ensure and maybe draw insights what kind of people are actually looking for the social housing and what's in more demand in terms of housing segment. And also, another important point of our system, that people who are actually in need and for the social housing, they are actually catered for and they don't feel neglected in this whole process of the distribution of social housing. However, our system, some cons that our system possess is it restricts freedom of choice for people. But I think we all established the fact that we are in a crisis, and we really cannot fulfill everybody wants. Instead, we focus on fulfilling everybody's needs, so that we ensure maximum people are getting allocated the housing, and people l- are not living without a roof over their head, and especially people who are in the most need for the social housing. Another con of the system is, as we already mentioned in the first slide, we noticed that a lot of just to be safe signups. Our system doesn't really mitigate that. So I mean, people like there's a big problem that people are still living in the social housing even though their economic situation has improved. So we have made some recommendations what can be done for the next steps, perhaps the next steps, and talking about the fact that people are not moving of the social house. We propose the fact that Corpovenista can maybe practice the fixed tenure tenancies, which is quite a popular practice in UK and New Zealand, where you provide a fixed tenure of contract based on their income, of course, to the people who apply for the social housing. And after that tenure ends, and if this economic situation of the people who applied for the social housing improves in that period and they are able to find a place in the private market, then the contract needs to be terminated. If not, then the new lease agreement can be prepared for the tenant. The other next step perhaps would be to test this new system with the improvement in the data collection, and also to ensure transparency. I think because that is the most important thing, at least for the users who apply for the social housing, that they understand the system and they understand how it works, so that people have more trust in the system, and also improves the overall satisfaction for people who applied for the social housing. So that was it. Thank you very much for having us here, and we welcome any questions from the audience now.
Okay, Chitransh, thank you very much, and Nanon, thank you for your presentation, explanation of your solution. I will invite the other ones to react on the solution. Maybe it's not for everyone completely clear in 20 minutes, but maybe someone will react on your presentation.
Okay.
After maybe one thing, after a few minutes, then I will tell the audience about the other solutions. I will do that in Dutch, because otherwise it will take too much time. But we have now a few minutes to react on your solution.
We have a question from Amarens in the chat.
Yes, thanks. I was wondering, in the room stress measurements, are you counting with one living room as a basics and then plus one bedroom for a single, or is one room in your presentation one room in total?
By room stress, we mean not the living room, but actually the bedroom where people can stay. Because I mean, people can still live without a living room, but I think a room is something that's supposed to be there for people to sleep or just to do their normal practices. So by room, we just mean a bedroom, not a living room. So that is not really taken into account when we're calculating room stress.
Okay, thanks.
So if you say one room, because it's not entirely clear for me. If you say a person gets one room, does it mean a one-room apartment, or does it mean a living room plus a bedroom? Actually, that depends on the dwelling. Because, for example, where I live right now, I mean, we have like 2 rooms in my house, but there is no living room. So, I mean, so I would say, I mean, the way we see it right now, living room is not really an essential for people as compared to a bedroom. So by room, we means our own space for an adult or for a couple, or even for children. Okay. Thanks. And I had one question myself. Is room stress not taken into account for allocation to urgency group 1? Do you want to take that, Anne?
Yeah, sure. No, it actually is being taken into account because people within the urgency group 1 also collect points. And if, for example, people have like the same score, they get differentiated by specifically looking at what person better fits to, has a better room stress value in the end then. And then that person gets more points. So it's being taken into account as well. Okay, thanks.
Maarten, je had een vraag, zie ik.
Well, I think it's quite a nice system to consider if people have an urgent situation. In fact, in the models we have now, we try to make two different levels. One level is giving priority to people with an urgent housing request, and the second is giving room for people without a very urgent request, but who want to move to improve their housing conditions. Am I right if I say that your proposal mostly is fit for that first category? So this could be a system next to another system which gives room for people who are not urgent but just want to improve their housing conditions.
I would even say that it takes into account both, because we also have like the normal waiting list next to the urgency groups as well. So when we're working with the quota for urgency group 1, for example, we have a 20% quota for people from that urgency group, and then there's like just like the normal wait with the normal people, the waiting list with them, and into that waiting list the urgency group 2 falls as well, because we're not separating like the rest of the 80% that we still have to give away. We're not separating between urgency group 2 and the rest of the people that are on the waiting list. So I would say it's taking into account both.
Yeah, you can improve when you have enough points in the other row, isn't it? So when you don't have points of urgency, I think Martha asked, can you improve without having urgency in your system?
Okay. The thing is, the way we have designed the system is basically the people who are the most need for the social housing, which actually falls in the urgency group. They do have sort of a leverage in our system because they are the ones who get more points. But for people who doesn't really fall in the urgency groups, I'm afraid there is not much of a scope for them to actually improve their conditions in the waiting list, because first of all, they don't really lie in any of the urgency groups. The only possible way that they can get ahead or perhaps get more points in the waiting list if they actually have a good room stress pertaining to the availability of the dwelling.
But one of the first sheets you showed, I thought there was a system that said there's 10 points for just waiting a year, 50 points, and 30 or 20 points for urgency 1 and urgency 2. So I was wondering, does it mean that someone who has no urgency has to wait 5 years for having the same amount of points as someone with urgency 1 has within 1 year? Is that your idea?
Yep.
So if you're not urgent but you wait, then after a couple of years you can compete with people who are urgent in the points you have. Is that right?
Yes, sir. And also I would like to mention, I mean, this whole system revolves around the adequacy, to ensure the efficiency and adequacy of the system, and also the income aspect or the affordability aspect is not really taken into account. But when you actually integrate the affordability aspect as well, then perhaps the system might needs to be altered in a way that it's still within the realms of the 4 main indicators of efficiency, ethic, fairness, and effectiveness.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Boris?
Yes. Oh, Nanon and Chitransh, thank you so much for your proposal. I have a question about the efficiency. So how is this system faster in distributing all these dwellings to the potential renters than the systems we have now?
Okay, so I mean, if we talk about efficiency, the thing is that the systems we were not really able to implement the system in the data set that was provided to us, given the fact we needed more data to implement our system. So by efficiency, we don't exactly mean by time. By efficiency, we mean that more people are actually allocating to the number of dwellings which are available. For example, if there's a family of two, they're not living in a house which has 7 rooms. So in that sense, it's increasing the efficiency of the allocation of the housing and the people who are living in the housing.
Right. But that exactly that thing you say, a small family living in a house that is way too large for them, that doesn't exist in the system I know from Amsterdam, right? We have a suitability way of thinking. So a one person a household can only have a 1 or 2 room house. So did you take that into account in your system also?
Can you go ahead, Nana?
And how is that different from the system we have here?
It's not the system in a lot of other countries, I think, a lot of other cities, I think, for us.
Okay. First of all, we must say that we didn't know how the current system works. Like yeah, the company didn't want to frame us, so we really got pretty much no information on how the actual system just works. And yeah, so we actually don't really have a direct comparison.
And in the new system for us in Amsterdam, that match is that you get it. Dat is toch niet precies wat het passend moet zijn?
Yeah, it needs to be suitable. It's pretty strict, yeah. And actually, the whole thing about waiting and having some sort of urgency, creating more points, that is the new system we're implementing in a few years' time. But in the actual system we have now, suitability is also there. So for small households, you get small homes. Larger households with kids get larger homes.
Yeah, but there are different rows, not a different point system. So you can get in or you cannot get in.
Right.
That's how it is, isn't it? It's labeling.
Well, there's some urgency through the municipality, for instance, and then you get in front of any row. So actually you get outside of the road to get a home, which is also called the urgency system. But still, if you don't know how the systems work, your ID is perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, the idea was the Corpovenista did not wanted us to know the exact system, the existing system. Otherwise, there is no room for creativity.
Sure.
That's right. I think the advantage of what this proposal means is that you're gonna look to people who are living in two scarce room. I don't know if that's correct English, but if your room is too small, if your house is too small, you get more points. So people who are living overcrowded in a house can get more points, and in that way more urgency to get a bigger house. And that's not in the current system because we don't know really how the situation is of the people who are applying for a house. We don't know if they live in a 2-room house or a 8-room house in the moment.
What you just said, I mean, that's what our system is actually mitigating, to avoid that situation where people are either living in too crammed up places or people who are living in places which is way too big for them. So that was the whole idea of our system, that it ensures the adequacy, that the right dwelling is getting matched with the right families or the right people.
Yes, but people get children, people lose children are flying out, partners are leaving. So that's one of your last sheets, I think, that your proposal also says check the situation after a couple of years and check if it's still a good match.
Yes, of course. I mean, it's a dynamic thing, and there are circumstances which can come. For example, I mean, like you said, I mean, people moving in, children moving out. But the idea, what we proposed was, I mean, to ensure, because what we also noticed that there are also people who are living in the social housing, even though, I mean, their financial or economic situation has improved, and they don't really actually fit in for the need for the social housing. So what our idea was basically, I mean, to have a tenure for contracts for the social housing, and after the end of the tenure, to ensure if the economic situation has improved and if they can find a place in the private market, then the lease or the lease agreement has to be terminated so that the dwelling becomes available for the people who actually needs the housing.
Okay, Chitransh, and Nanon, maybe some other questions, or we will finish this discussion for now. Because otherwise I will give a short explanation to the other solution, other duos. I will do it in English, Nanon, or in Dutch, Chitransh and Nanon, so you can stay when you want, but I will do it in Dutch.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Maybe, Chitransh, you can stop sharing the screen.
Yes.
Yes, thanks.
Okay. We hadden 3 duo's, dus daar wil ik kort nog iets even over zeggen. Misschien ook even, Janneke, Black Bear evalueren, om te kijken of voor deze groep, zeg maar, Black Bear een interessante partij is om er vaker mee te werken. Misschien nog eerst wat over de woonruimteverdeling. Kort terug, we hadden 3 duo's en een paar dingen vielen mij op. Het is jammer dat André er niet is, maar ik denk ook wel dat ik namens hem praat. We waren allemaal jonge mensen en allemaal, zeg maar, grijpen ze in het systeem. Dus ze komen met heel gedetailleerd uitwerken hoe ze willen dat het verdeeld moet worden. Dus er zat niet, het kan toeval zijn, maar er zaten geen, laten we zeggen, ultieme marktdenkers bij. Die zeiden, joh, je moet het laten lopen en dan gaat vanzelf de prijs omhoog of omlaag. Dus het viel mij op, zeg maar, dat die vorm van liberaal denken, die zit in elk geval, nou ja, in deze steekproef van deze generatie zit die niet. Dus dat vond ik eigenlijk toch wel weer apart. Wat ze ook